All right. Welcome back to the Orthodox Squad podcast. It's not much of a squad today. Some people are late, uh, running late, or can be here today. But me and Milos are here right now. Some people might join in the middle, like Sky or Strahinja. We have a special guest today, Ephraim or Orthodox Pilgrim. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Could you?
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Could you introduce yourself, how you came to Orthodoxy, why Orthodoxy is the true faith for you and for all of us, of course?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'll try to make it as succinct as possible. I came from a Protestant background originally. I spent 37 years in the Lutheran Church here in America. I was part of the Wisconsin Synod. I didn't feel spiritually fed and satisfied within that church, even though it was a good church to grow up in, at least initially as a child. About 15 years ago, I spent 2 years researching Catholicism and decided against it for reasons of both theology and church history. And then actually stumbled on Orthodoxy when I wasn't even looking for it about 6 or 7 years ago, and converted with my wife and children about 3 years ago.
Sounds very good. I like that. So our topic today is fasting, Orthodox fasting. A lot of inquirers have no idea about fasting because they've never done it before, or their church just doesn't do it. Did your Protestant church do it, or not at all?
No, not really. It wasn't that it was completely foreign or alien a concept to us, but it really wasn't anything that we ever got involved in, as a church group or whatever. I think if anything, perhaps people individually as Lutherans might have been fasting on their own, either with or without the guidance of their pastor. But it was definitely nothing that was ever emphasized to me during the catechism. And most Lutheran children go through catechism between the age of, say, 12 and 13 to about 15 or 16 years old, after which you are considered confirmed and in the church officially, and you're then able to partake of the Eucharist, which is the only other sacrament in the Orthodox Church. The only other sacrament in the Lutheran Church besides baptism itself.
Indeed. Okay, interesting. So the first time you really fasted was in the Orthodox Church, when you became a part of the Orthodox Church, or did you begin already when you were, like, for example, inquiring or a catechumen?
Yeah. Well, funny story about that. So what happened was, for me and my wife, is when we were first inquiring into the church, after I'd already been looking into the church for 2 years, just in terms of, education, reading, watching a lot of videos and lectures to try to get acquainted with what is Orthodoxy and what it's all about. During that 2 year period of time, I never set foot inside an Orthodox church, but thereafter I did. And when my wife and I started attending, there was a very sweet young girl at the first church we ever went to. And she said that she would very much like for us to take a copy of their calendar, because the calendar would actually be something we could kind of post on the wall in our kitchen. And it would tell us, the readings of the day, the saints of the day, and it'd also tell us whether or not there was a fasting day or not. Well, to an extent, that was my first real interaction or introduction to fasting. And so I took the calendar home and pinned it up in the kitchen, as she had suggested, and started kind of looking at it. And I said, "Oh, honey," to my wife, "it looks like we're supposed to be fasting this week on Wednesday and Friday. Let me figure that out." So what does anyone do? They go online, they Google it, and I looked up Orthodox fasting, and sure enough, it said, "Oh, well, on Wednesdays and Fridays, you should abstain from these 6 different foodstuffs, meat, eggs, dairy, fish, wine, and olive oil." Now, I didn't know why. I just knew I was supposed to be doing it, or at least I thought I was supposed to be doing it. So we did start fasting almost right away after having discovered it. And that was in the fall of that year. So we were about a month or two out from the Nativity fast, which, as you know, is a 40-day fast before the birth of Christ is commemorated and celebrated. And so we had already been fasting. So we went ahead and did. We participated in the Nativity fast. No one told us otherwise, or that we should or shouldn't as inquirers. And about 3 months after that, as we're getting closer, well, maybe not 3 months, but two months or so before Lent, our priest comes to us and he says, "Hey, so I want to talk to you about fasting." I said, "Oh, no problem, Father. We've already been doing that. Yeah, we got it down. Everything's great." And he said, "Wait." And he said, "Wait, what?" And I said, "Well, yeah, someone gave us this calendar that you guys use, and so we've just been following along, as best we can, and and all that." And he said, "Oh, well, gosh, okay, well, you probably shouldn't have been doing that. You might want to wait till you're catechized, and then you understand why you're fasting." Which, by the way, he was right. We were fasting kind of just to fast. We didn't necessarily know all the spiritual reasons at that time why we were doing it. And that, of course, is kind of why we always recommend to inquirers and catechumens alike, don't rush into fasting. Don't be like me. It was a total accident on my part. I didn't mean to do it. But I recognize now that there's a reason why we work with our priests, on fasting.
Exactly. You really need the guidance of your spiritual father or your parish priest when you start fasting,
Yeah.
Some recommend you to just, abstain from meat the first time,
Right.
or, just dairy for the first time. It's really different, and it really depends on how heavy it's gonna be on you, of course.
Right. Yeah, very true.
Yes. Welcome, Strahinja. You're finally here.
Thank you. I
Um,
rushed here. I had a last minute phone call for some event I'm organizing with some radio people, and yeah, I mean, it was crazy, but I'm glad to be here.
all right, so I'm gonna ask you a question right away to get you in the mood. You know that video when someone asks you, "Why do we fast?" I'm gonna ask.
Yeah, of course. I watched it
I'm,
several times.
I'm gonna ask you that. Why do we fast?
Well, we fast for multiple reasons. First is because the fast is a period in which we are going to be closer to Christ and closer to the church. We take something that's very dear to us, for example, food, which is really important in our culture and just important to our body. Like meat and all these things that we take away are the tastiest foods, the nicest foods, the foods that bring the most nutrients to our body. We take them away to be able to focus more on the spiritual. We take away the complex dishes. We take away the complex cooking, things that takes time, and we replace that time by prayer and time to think about Christ.
Exactly. Do you have anything to add, Ephraim?
Please don't take away my bacon. I beg you. Yeah, but no, seriously. Yeah, everything he just said is very accurate. We fast for spiritual reasons. We fast because, as he said, it helps us draw closer to God, spend more time in prayer and contemplation, hopefully reading the Holy Scriptures more, reading the lives of the saints more. And he's right. When you don't have to think about what it is you're going to eat that day, by kind of reducing your meals to something much more simple, right? Like beans and rice. I mean, how hard is it to make beans and rice? The answer is not very hard. So it's not to say that that's all we're eating during fasting periods. That's just one small example of a way in which we can take away the burden of having to make some sort of complex, casserole or stew or chili or whatever it might be, and just keep things very simple. And that way we can spend more time focused on the spiritual life.
Exactly. It's not only abstaining from food, it's abstaining from the passions, bad thoughts,
Yes.
lies, all those kind of things, and that's really what it's about. It's about discipline, getting into a discipline where you abstain from your passions. It needs to help you. It's not really about the food,
Right.
It's
Yeah.
about abstaining and getting discipline, getting your mindset right for
Well,
Christ.
And if I may add to that, the one thing about food that even science, has discovered, medicine has discovered, is that food itself absolutely can, depending on the type of food, be something that leads to a greater indulgence or desire for excess. And that can be, excess in terms of, the food itself, so gluttony or, drinking lots of alcohol or these sorts of things, but also the passion of lust, or the desire for sex. Science has even shown that there is a direct correlation to eating large, sumptuous, fatty, rich meals of animal fats and dairy and eggs and all these sorts of heavy, chocolate, wine, all these sorts of things can actually lead us to then feeling passionate in other areas of our life. Now, science is not going to view them as passions, and science isn't going to view it as being inherently sinful, like we will, of course, as part of the church. But it is interesting to note that there is even this kind of secular concept that this is true. And looky here, the church has been saying it's true for, the past several thousand years,
Yeah, I've been seeing ads on like Facebook or Instagram where it's like, you should begin to fast now. All these benefits, blah blah blah. And I'm just thinking to myself, are you just discovering this? Are people really going to do this? Like, we've been doing this for thousands of years.
Exactly right.
Not really something new.
Yeah.
But it's something great. Right now we are all abstaining from meat this week. It's the pre-Lent, and that comes to my next question, Milos. When do we fast? Because a lot of people are confused. Like, when do I have to fast? When is that? When is this?
So normally we fast on every Wednesday and Friday. The reason for that is Wednesday for the day of Christ's betrayal and Friday for his crucifixions. So in remembrance of those days, we fast. And like you said, we abstain from certain foods to get closer to God, to be focused more on our prayer life. And it's very important during the fasting time to focus more on prayer, don't gossip, and try our best to be better humans.
Yeah, it's not really about not doing that when we don't fast. You still have to try and not sin, of course, but this is going to help you greatly when you fast, indeed. So it's Wednesday and Friday mainly. It can differ when there's like a feast day on Wednesday or Friday, of course. A feast day is when a saint is being commemorated. But there's larger periods as well. Every Wednesday and Friday, okay, throughout the year. But for example, Great Lent is coming right now. And what is Lent exactly? Could someone explain that to me and to the viewers?
Yes, so the Great Lent that's coming up now is the fasting period before Easter or Pascha, how you would say. And in that time already everybody explained that what we are doing. And we will fast those in the Great Lent till Easter, till Christ has risen. That's how we celebrate it.
And it's 40 days. And 40
Yeah.
days is not just randomly. It's because Christ himself fasted 40 days in the desert, if you didn't know that. He fasted 40
Right.
days. The temptation of the devil, he tried to tempt Christ, which he was never tempted, like one movie suggests. But he was never
Yeah,
tempted.
yeah.
40 days fasting before, in the desert. So that's why we do it. And Christ himself also in the Bible says, when the bridegroom is gone, my apostles have to fast. So that's why we fast as well. And even says it to do it on Wednesday and Friday. Exactly. So, why do we fast and when do we fast? We have accomplished now. It's not only the Lent, it's also, like you said before, for Christmas, and we have the Apostles' Fast as well. There's many periods in the calendar year when we do fast, mainly just to, get that skill, or not skill, ability to resist our passions better. Now, let's talk a little bit about the food. We should abstain from meat, oil, alcohol, dairy products. That includes eggs. A lot of people ask then, what if I just use, a substitute? Like a vegan burger, for example. Is that fasting as well? Is that legit? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, Ephraim.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having to mute a little bit because my corgi is being loud behind me
I
in the
love
backyard.
corgis.
But yeah, she's okay when she's behaving herself. Well, yeah. So in terms of using substitute things, I know many Orthodox who do, myself included. But we have to kind of understand why are we doing that. Let me give a good example. If we are eating like you said, vegan burger, just as an example, and I'll maybe use another example after that too. But if we are eating a vegan burger during Lent, are we eating it because it is ultimately made from things we're allowed to eat during Lent, and therefore it provides nutrition and sustenance to us through Lent? Or are we eating it because we're sort of kind of cheating a little bit, and it's like, oh gosh, I really miss having burgers, so I'm going to go get this vegan burger so I can pretend I'm having a burger. For me, it's the former and not the latter. I use, some of these, pea protein based meat substitute things, just so that I have different options that I can make, because I'm the cook at home, at least as far as evening meals is generally concerned. And I've got children, so I try to make dishes that they like spaghetti, and different types of noodle dishes and stuff. And so I'll add some pea-based protein, meat into it, which, by the way, I'm not a huge fan of that stuff in general, but as Orthodox, I figured, well, if it's something that we can use to supplement protein in our diets, besides things like shrimp and shellfish, which are allowed, then at least it gives me some different options so that my children aren't ripping their hair out. Because to be honest with you, if I was just cooking for me and my wife, we'd probably eat the same 1 or 2 or 3 dishes over and over again during Lent if we didn't have children in the house, because we don't care and we're pretty simple when it comes to that sort of thing. But our kids, they get tired of it, they get a little bit bored. So back to your original point, it's like, well, why are you eating the vegan burger? Why are you eating different substitute things? Another thing that people will use too, I found during the Lenten fasts, is they'll use butter substitutes, which are basically entirely based on vegetables or vegetable oil. Now, that's a whole conversation in and of itself as to whether or not vegetable oils are something we really should be eating anyway, just from a health standpoint. I'm of the personal mindset that it's really not a great idea. But I think if things are used sparingly, then it's not necessarily the end of the world either. Everything in moderation, as they say, sort of thing. So the real question is, why are you eating these particular, vegan types of products? Are you doing it to cheat the fast? Or are you doing it because you're still trying to uphold the spirit of the fast and not become some sort of, Pharisaical label reader? Which, by the way, a couple of priests have told me, they said, don't read labels. If you're reading a label during any fast, you're essentially defeating the spirit of the fast because you're being paranoid. Let me give a great example. If you're going to buy some crackers, well, it's probably the fact that a lot of crackers either have milk or butter or something in them. So here's an idea. Don't worry about those types of crackers. But if you see a box of cheese flavored crackers, and we're supposed to be avoiding cheese during Lent, well, then just avoid it because it's a cheese cracker. So logically it's going to have cheese in it. But if you're getting a basic saltine cracker, which may or may not have dairy in it or not, it could just be, literally water, flour, and some salt and something else that just makes a very basic cracker like we have here. Then, again, don't read the labels because you're just going to sit there and become paranoid. And that we want to uphold the spirit of the fast, which also is the joy. Fasting is our joy. It's not it shouldn't be a drudgery at all. Anyway, so I could go in a few different directions.
No, you can, of course.
Kick it back to you. Yeah.
The label thing, I think that's very funny. I have a personal experience with that because when I didn't know anything about that, I was reading labels left and right. I was like, does this have any egg traces or meat traces?
Was this made in a factory where milk is processed?
Yeah. I was like, man, this is hard. And then I looked up some information on the internet and it said, don't read the labels. It's not about that. And it really isn't. Yeah. So I call it the vegan syndrome. You know how vegans read every single label if it has any, products in it from animals or anything like that. Right. So I call it the vegan syndrome. And I was suffering from that syndrome in the beginning. So I've stopped doing that. I was like, does this donut have any milk in it or anything? Right. So I was like, is it vegan? Yeah. I was even looking it up on the internet.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I'll mention, at least as far as my own fasting kind of goes, and I know generally speaking, we're not supposed to really, discuss our fasting rules, just like we don't discuss our own personal prayer rules because we don't want to scandalize, our brethren and stuff, because maybe they're fasting more or less than we are. And we don't want them to, be concerned about these things. But I'll just say very generically that during Lent especially, I eat a lot of sugar. I get by on candy bars and peanut butter and just different things like that because it's not for me. It's I'm getting away with anything. It's like, no, it's a means to an end. If I can eat a quick Snickers bar as a snack when I'm at work, it costs me $1.25, and at least my body will process that sugar and turn it into energy, because the human body, in terms of seeking energy sources, is primarily looking for fats or looking for sugars. Well, since we're restricting a lot of the fats that we would normally consume from dairy, eggs, and milk and cheese, and obviously animal fats and stuff, well, then the other source of energy we can get some stuff from is sugar. So I'm notorious for making a batch of oatmeal cookies during Lent all the time and eating oatmeal cookies daily, because oatmeal is kind of nice anyway because it fills you up. And I'd rather have a cookie that I can just grab and take on the go, than actually making an actual bowl of oatmeal or porridge, for breakfast. I just grab a couple cookies and then head off to work, So for me, it's like I'm not even looking at it like it's a treat. It's just something to put in my system to keep me going, through the day. Anyway, so because a lot of people ask that, like they're influenced heavily by Western Christianity, especially if they're a convert to Orthodoxy. And, Lent in the West really isn't strict at all when it comes to fasting. You'll hear people, of course, every year it comes up in conversations, both in person and online, where, heterodox Christians say, oh, I'm giving something up for Lent. Well, that's great. And, I'm sure they're doing it hopefully for the right reasons, but it does come across as not particularly strict. And so they're saying things like, oh, well, I'm giving up chocolate, or I'm giving up sugar, or I'm giving up soda. Well, yeah, those things might be good to give up. And maybe even we as Orthodox Christians should give those things up during Lent too, if it is a treat for us, if it is something that we're always constantly craving, because maybe there's a little bit of an addiction to those substances. For me, I'd like to think at least that I'm not addicted to sugar. I just tend to use it as a means to an end.
Exactly. It's not about giving up. It's really not. It's not sacrificial, The purpose of fasting is to learn discipline in the end, to gain control of those things that are indeed, within our control, but we so often allowed to control us. It's
right.
It's a lot of people think about giving up. I give up this, blah, blah, blah. And the Catholic Church even said, I think they don't even have to fast that strict anymore, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it's still just a fish on Friday thing, right? But maybe someone else knows.
Yeah, they don't give up meat fully, so they skip a meal on last Wednesday. They were skipping a meal, and they are skipping a meal on Friday before Easter, and that's skipping one meal a day. And then they are recommended to give up one thing. So people will usually try to stop smoking, or stop something like that, stop something that's like a vice in life, basically. But I wanted to interject. I wanted to say that this label thing actually. Well, I was not fasting as a kid, because in my household we were not really fasting, and I was just eating the food that I was served. So when I started fasting, I was reading all the labels, and now I know which items have no dairy in them. So basically, at this point, I'm just buying if I buy bread, I'll buy bread with no milk traces and all that stuff. It's so funny because if somebody had told me that earlier, that would have saved me a lot of time. Because when I
got a headache.
My father, he just asked me, "Have you fasted?" And I was like, "Yes, Father, yeah, I fasted." And then he didn't get into detail with me, and so I was just, I was just doing the label thing as well. It's really funny because right now I have my preferred brands of things that, have no traces and stuff. I became like a label ninja at that point.
Right.
I also think it's important to mention that before taking the Eucharist, it's important to have fasted during the week. I wouldn't take the Eucharist personally if I didn't fast on Wednesday and Friday. I don't know about you guys, but I think it's an advice. It's not officially you have to fast, but it's advisable, right, Milos?
Well, and fasting is normative for us as Orthodox Christians. So you just get used to that pattern of fasting on a normal week on Wednesday and on Friday. And also we fast generally either from midnight on Sunday morning through until we receive the Eucharist, which is quite literally the first food, so to speak, and sustenance we receive spiritually from Christ himself, as it is his body and blood. So that's the very first thing that we're allowing ourselves to be nourished by at the start of the new week, which hopefully will even set the tone, spiritually speaking, for that week ahead. Also, I do know in some of what I call the old world countries, obviously since I live over here, the new world, that my Russian godparents, for example, I believe that they actually adhere to fasting before receiving the Eucharist, beginning at sundown on Saturday evening. And that is also a tradition too. So that, they're going even longer, in terms of a fast, almost that's pushing at least, 10 or 12 hours at that point,
I must say I get very hungry before the Eucharist during liturgy. My stomach is just doing a whole concert by itself when I'm standing there. But as soon as I take the Eucharist, that hunger goes away every single time. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. It's wondrous. And it comes back after an hour, but for a while, it's gone. And it's just amazing. And
the body adjusts too, that the body does get used to fasting. At first, it can be kind of difficult. And that's one reason why, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, many priests will tell their inquirers or catechumens, I want you to fast, but I only want you to fast from this one foodstuff, just fast from dairy or just fast from eggs or meat. Just do that and just get used to the Wednesday and Friday fast. And then they'll even tell them, when we start doing our longer fasts, like Nativity, which is 40 days before, Christmas, or like we talked about before, the Lenten fast, and which also doesn't include the 7 days of Holy Week, right? So you fast for 40 days of Lent and 7 days of Holy Week, and then break the fast on Pascha or Easter. The issue is that, if people are being told by their priest to just fast on Wednesdays and Fridays, even during those longer fasts, that's a good thing. Just be obedient to your priest, because eventually you will fully participate in the fast. You will do the 40-day fasts and learn what that's like. And you have to ease yourself into it, which is exactly what we do before Lent, like you said, when we started the stream. This week is a week where we can't have meat. And this coming Sunday is the last time we can have eggs and cheese and fish, and because Lent begins for us on Monday. So it's gradually easing us into the Lenten fast, because if you were to compare the Lenten fast to the Nativity fast, the Lenten fast is much, much more strict. In fact, unless I'm wrong, I think there's only one real feast during Lent, which is Feast of the Annunciation, where we're allowed to actually have fish, wine, and olive oil. And it's just a dispensation for that day, essentially, because it's to celebrate the Feast of the Annunciation. Other than that, there's no other real fish days that I'm aware of, at least during Lent,
No, yeah, exactly.
Yep.
I want to get
another thing I would like to add.
Go ahead. Yeah.
There are even so many. We already mentioned the Russian tradition that they don't intake something in the body at sundown the day before they take Holy Communion. And there are so many different kind of traditions in the jurisdictions. For example, some jurisdictions say no olive oil. Some other jurisdiction might say no oil at all during the fast.
Right.
So it's always, like Ephraim already said, talk with your priest first. Don't do it on your own. It's way easier like that. You have to have a guidance.
Yeah.
And I have a funny story from last year during the Nativity fast. I was back then working in a hotel, and I did the night shift at reception. And we had normally always a tradition. Before you take the Eucharist, you go to bed. And then when you wake up, you don't drink anything, you don't eat anything, you don't smoke a cigarette. The first thing in your body will be the Holy Communion. Then I asked my priest, how should I do it? I never go to sleep. I'm working the whole night, and then I'm going home and to get my church clothes, and then I go to church. How should I do it? He was like thinking, yeah, it's tough working in the night without drinking something. Do it till 6 in the morning. Then from 6 in the morning, you're not allowed anymore. So I got that exemption back then.
Exactly.
Right.
You might even have medical problems. You should always consult your priest when you want to fast or how you have to fast. There's plenty of diseases or other medical reasons which can exempt you from fasting or make it less hard on you.
Yeah.
It's really
even
not
if
about the food. Huh?
Sorry for interrupting.
go ahead.
Even if somebody is, I know a lot of elder persons who can't fast because they have to have a certain amount of iron in the body. Like they have to eat way more iron so that it's sustainable for their bodies. For example, my grandparents, they have to eat a lot of meat for their body, but it always depends. For some, let's say maybe somebody else, he has to drink milk for some time. Maybe he has problems with his bones or something else. So he needs those nutritions. So it always depends on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I have an anecdote. Like I remember when I was a kid at church, I remember sadly a woman getting very sick on Friday before Easter, and I talked about it with my Orthodox relatives and stuff, and that was definitely not something that was like recommended, nor by the priest nor by anybody. Nobody wants you to make yourself sick. Nobody wants you to like get into something that you cannot do. Like, your priest will definitely never recommend you do something that is not possible for you to do if you tell them the whole thing.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
For example, my priest said once to me, we are not all the same. And we just have to do our best to our own possibilities.
Right. I would also make the note that there are some exemptions to fasting for other people too. Women who are pregnant and women who are nursing their babies, they do not need to participate in the fast, or they could potentially participate, but just have it heavily modified. And like you guys said, by working with their priest. Also, very small children don't necessarily fast. Now, it is true in some of our Orthodox societies around the world, perhaps in Romania or Serbia or Greece or elsewhere, perhaps little children of the age of 5, 6, 7 years old begin fasting. That would be considered earlier than here in the States. And it's not to say that it's right or wrong either. It's whatever, people are kind of used to, and this sort of thing is perfectly fine. And as you guys also mentioned, if you're sick, a lot of times your priest will let you break the fast as well, because we need to try to keep up our energy and our immune system so that we can fight off whatever disease it is that we're dealing with. Whereas if we were to fast during the midst of that, it could potentially cause us more harm with our health, or even make it take longer for us to recover. So we're obviously not foolish either with respect to fasting, but it's always best to work with our priests, but also to work with our doctors as well. If our doctors, like you said, put us under advisement and said, well, you're lacking iron because you're an elderly person, so you need to make sure you're eating, some beef or some other food sources that have the type of iron that you need, to sustain yourself and make sure that you can stay in as good health as possible.
Milos, or
Yes.
Stahinia or Ephraim, do you have any maybe personal stories when it comes to fasting? Because we all live in a Western country. You live in Austria, France, the US. I live in Holland. Do you have any personal questions, like, for example, when you asked, or someone asked you, why are you not eating this today? Or why are you not eating meat? It's like, and you were like, fasting. I'm fasting. We're like, what? You're Muslim?
Oh
you have
yeah,
any personal
I have a couple of funny stories like that. I remember on my first job when I was 16, I went to work with my food, and it was just some baked potatoes in the oven. And they looked horrible. I made them myself. And baked potatoes with nothing on except salt and pepper. And everybody was looking at me, eating bread and potatoes. Like, what are you eating? Then I had to explain what fasting is, and they asked me, "Are you Muslim?" I said, "No, I'm Orthodox Christian." I had to explain them that, and they looked at me like I was part of a crazy cult. That's how I felt. I felt I got that bad look from them, like, man, those guys are weird.
The funny thing is, when Muslims ask me, they're like, oh, wait, you fast too? And I was like, yeah, but it's differently. And they're like, oh, that's pretty cool, actually. I respect you for that. And when, for example, Dutch people ask me, like, but why? Wait, you don't eat all day and you eat at night because they think fasting, Muslims only fast.
Right.
Because unfortunately, there's not a lot of Christians here. I'm like, no, I can eat this during the day. So wait, that's a lot easier. I'm like, wait, you try eat no dairy or meat for 40 days and you'll see how hard that is.
Definitely. Water fast, it changes the flavor of the season. Like, there is a rhythm to the year with the fasts. And if you do like the Serbian calendar, it's actually a good part of the year that you are fasting. And if you are doing the water fast on water fast days, you can really feel it. Like, you feel the difference in your food tastes different. You will, of course, prepare it a lot faster. There is a very noticeable difference. Like, for people who haven't done it, that's like a big thing. For me, when I used to work in McDonald's, I would, on oil days, I would just have fries, and on like water days, I could not eat nothing from there, unfortunately. So yeah, people just assume that I'm a Muslim. Now in my current workplace, people assume that I'm Orthodox Jew. I already had that all the time. Because I said, oh, I'm Orthodox, and they're like, oh, so you wear the little hat? I didn't know what to answer to that, so I just left it, hanging. But yeah, something useful I think I can tell is I'm a student. I'm a music student, and I've been studying for a long time. I'm going for a master's degree. And as a student, I work just jobs, little jobs, and I worked as a docker, just unloading merchandise from a really big truck, from these big containers, these 33-ton containers that would pop up on the dock in my town. And our job was just to take the merchandise from the container and put them on wooden pallets. Like, it's just a very manual job, very hard job. And if you're fasting during those periods, like, for some people it can be a big challenge. First of all, like, I recommend talking to a priest, like getting a recommendation, like what to actually do. And second of all, if you're strong and you're feeling good, big tip, to keep you strong during those periods is to eat carbohydrates. Like sometimes you might feel like just potatoes and bread, it's not going to be able to sustain me. We all heard about protein because of like fitness culture and stuff. And
Lentils.
I'm also, yeah, lentils are great, beans are great, peanuts are very tasty, very good food to eat, and they also have a lot of protein, and they are satiating. They have calories as well. But don't be afraid. Just of course, always eat a breakfast. A breakfast is the most important meal of the day to just give you strength. And sometimes you need to just try those things and see what is really possible for you. But for me, I could function or even on water fast. It was just important that I actually become more structured with my eating. I become more disciplined, never skip a breakfast, never skip a lunch, and just keep it simple, just loads of carbs, loads of things.
Yeah.
Loads of simple things, basic foods, just whatever our ancestors ate. That's what's going to keep you strong, like most of the time. Also, another thing, like I wanted to bring up in the podcast, since I know that we are running out of time, is sometimes I work in the music industry a lot now, since that's what I'm studying. And you will not meet a lot of Orthodox people in the music industry in the West, basically by nature of it. And often from older people who are like 50 and above, usually they will have a very negative image of the church. And if they figure out you're fasting, they will try and attack you for it. They will view this as something negative, like you're in some kind of dogmatic cult, you're in some kind of like a sect that needs to be debated and stuff. So sometimes, of course, with the permission of your priest, talk to him what to do in those situations. Like, should you, because you will be offered food sometimes in your job, sometimes in other places you will be offered food,
Listen,
and sometimes
let me
it's
interrupt you real
better.
quick there
Yeah.
for like a little second. When you get offered food, for example, if you go somewhere you get invited and people offer you food, it's impolite to reject it. So even if you're fasting, you're allowed to eat. For example, if you go to the family of your wife, for example, they usually know you're Orthodox, but I'm just giving a random example. It's impolite to refuse them, so it's worse to not accept their food than to say no, thank you, I'm fasting. You could do it, but my priest told me it's better to accept the food.
Yes.
Yeah,
There is an anecdote about. I'm sorry.
You're fine.
Go ahead.
No, you're good. Go
Yeah.
ahead and finish what you're going to say. It's fine.
There is an anecdote about Patriarch Pavle, our Serbian patriarch who was the patriarch when I was a child. He was visiting families of Serbian Christians all around Serbia, especially on the border zone in more like tougher situations. And a man who knew the patriarch was visiting in the middle of a great land prepared steak for him, and the patriarch, he ate the steak, even though of course he was aware of the fast and of course he was fasting, but he didn't want to bring shame to that man, bring shame to that household by refusing what the man cooked for him. And that shows how humble he was. For me, what determines will I accept the food that I'm offered, or the food, or not accept it, just reject it, will be based on the intention of the person that's giving me the food. So like if a granny comes up and she like made cookies and they happen to contain milk, I will take a minimum amount just to say, oh, I'm not so hungry, and take one, and she'll be really happy that you tasted her food, and you will definitely be doing a good thing, I think, and that's what I was advised to do. But if a person knows that you're fasting and they purposefully decide to prepare something that has meat or dairy in it, or tell you that something is vegan although they know it's not vegan, in that case I will not bend myself to those kinds of people. That's definitely improper. So I will definitely reject those people who have bad intentions. So you need I feel like I'm saying this to the viewers, but you need to figure out what's the situation, what is the context. Is this a man who was so proud that you're visiting him, or a family member like your wife's family or something who prepared something for you with love, and rejecting that food would disappoint them? Or is it just somebody who is trying to impose something on you? Or is it just somebody who is off sometimes at work you'll have those buffets, and if you don't take anything, nobody cares. Then you don't need to take, like, don't find excuses for yourself. Of course, everything is situation dependent.
Yes.
Of course, and that there's big differences in in different situations.
Yes. I want to quickly go to Ephraim because he has something to say as well, I think.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, yeah, we should never refuse hospitality when it's being offered to us, especially when people don't know that we're Orthodox. So if somebody's offering you something during a fasting period that does contain meat, cheese, eggs, or dairy, or whatever, then there's nothing wrong with being gracious and still thanking God that He is providing you with this food, asking Him to bless the food. And you can say, a kind of a quiet Orthodox prayer in your own heart, your own mind about it. But also, too, I have found that fasting around non-Orthodox people, whether they're heterodox Christians or otherwise, if they ask questions about it, it's a good opportunity to share the true gospel of Christ with them in whatever way you're able to, and not in some sort of judgmental way or in some sort of talking down to them way either, and certainly not placing yourself on any sort of pedestal like, oh, look at me, I'm better than you because I'm fasting for these spiritual reasons and you're not. That, of course, would be utterly ridiculous and completely unorthodox. But rather, we should use those opportunities to gently share the gospel with people who are willing to listen, just as Christ Himself said, "Let he who has ears, let him hear." And we also too need to heed Christ's own words when it comes to fasting too, right? He said, do not be like the hypocrites and twist up your face in the streets, letting other people know that you're fasting. Rather, fast in secret. That way your Father who is in heaven will reward you. And full disclosure, that may or may not have been word for word. I'm known for paraphrasing verses from the Bible sometimes when I can't remember them literally word for word. But anyway, but you get the understanding that, again, fasting is our joy. We do it for joyful and spiritual reasons. And if it does give us an opportunity to share with other people, we certainly can. One other quick tip, I would just say that, if you're really concerned about breaking the fast and you don't want to, even when food is being offered to you, I don't think it's necessarily rude to say, oh, I had something to eat earlier, I'm not terribly hungry, but thank you for offering. I don't think that's necessarily a bad way to deflect and then not even bring anything up, either. So again, work with your own priest, get his input, get his guidelines for you on what you should and shouldn't do in terms of participating or not participating,
Exactly. And I want to, touch on this subject as well. A lot of people don't know why we abstain from animal products in particular, but that has to do with the Jewish tradition in the Old Testament. For example, they fasted as well, just like Jesus did, just like the apostles did, and they abstained from animal products mainly, and that's why we do it to this day. I just want to get that out of here. Before we end it, does someone else have a personal story in the West with fasting? Maybe Ephraim?
Gosh, I'm trying to think.
You're in the U.S., so you have less Muslims around you, but,
Well, yeah, it depends on kind of where you live. That is definitely true. I would just say that, yeah, most heterodox Christians here, I live in the South. I live in Tennessee. And so most of the Christians that are here in the South are either Baptist or Methodist. For the most part. And there's other groups besides that, but those are the two main groups you could say. And oddly enough, some of them are actually aware of us Orthodox Christians because we are definitely growing here. In fact, Orthodoxy is growing the fastest in this particular region in North America, and largely due to the fact that we are very traditional, we are very wholesome, and we do put our families first. Along with our faith, and so they kind of do know of us. So I think sometimes, when we mention to people that we're fasting, it's not like they're completely ignorant of it or what it is. They just might not know all of the details, or why we fast and what we fast from. So again, it's another opportunity to share and teach people about Orthodoxy and why it is that we do what we do. And again, we do it in a very non-judgmental sort of way. We don't point out the fact that chances are the Baptist or Methodist standing in front of you is not fasting at all, during the year. But we just share why we fast, and then maybe just maybe that plants a little bit of a seed in their own heart, their own mind that, oh, well, there's something else out there that intrigues me about that. Maybe I'll go home and do some research on Orthodoxy tonight. You never know how people will be brought into the faith. Literally, you never know. You could say something to someone today and you don't even recognize that 5 to 10 years from now, and you don't even know this person or where they go or where they travel, they could come into the Orthodox faith simply because you were kind, you were considerate, and you weren't sharing Orthodoxy in some sort of judgmental sort of way. And that's one thing I would say.
Exactly. And that's a way of almsgiving as well. We're encouraged to alms give during the fasting period, give some money to the poor or help them with with a meal. And I think that's a very important part of fasting as well. A lot of people forget it's just not about abstaining from the food. It's sharing our love with the others, our neighbor. And I think that's very important.
Yeah.
So I want to end it with a quote. First of all, thank you very much for joining, Ephraim. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. It was very kind of you to have me on. I look forward to speaking with you guys again and get to know you better too.
Of course. You're welcome on
Thank
the
you.
Discord server if you like. So I want to end with this quote from Saint Athanasius the Great. He said, "Devils take great delight in fullness and drunkenness and bodily comfort. Fasting possesses great power and it works glorious things. To fast is to banquet with the angels." And I think that's a very beautiful quote to end this podcast episode. Thank you all for watching. God bless. Good luck in the fasting period. Make sure you talk to your priest during the fasting period. And have a blessed Lent, everybody. See you later.
Have a blessed Lent. Take care.